Chapter 1. The Gilded Deception. The auction house buzzed with the restless energy of London's elite, their whispers curling like smoke beneath the vaulted ceilings of the Carlton Auction Hall. Gaslight flickered across gilded frames and marble floors, casting long shadows over the crowd. At the centre of the room, atop a velvet-draped pedestal, sat the Ming Dynasty Lotus Vase, a cerulean masterpiece inlaid with gold dragons, its value rivaling the crown jewels. Auctioneer Reginald Whitcomb adjusted his monocle, his voice a practiced melody of charm and authority, as he opened the bidding at £50,000. Sherlock Holmes lingered near the back, his sharp eyes scanning the room with the precision of a falcon. Beside him, Dr. John Watson fidgeted, unaccustomed to the opulence. "A waste of time, Holmes," Watson muttered. "Lestrade's tip about a potential theft seems baseless. Not a ruffian in sight." Holmes said nothing, his gaze settling on a nervous footman near the service door and a woman in black lace gloves clutching a bidding paddle too tightly. The bidding soared past £200,000. Then, as Whitcomb raised his gavel, the gaslight sputtered and died. Darkness swallowed the room. A woman screamed. Glass shattered. Watson barked, "Stay calm!" But chaos erupted. Chairs toppled, footsteps thundered, and a draught swept in from an opened window. When the lights flared back moments later, the vase was gone. Lestrade of Scotland Yard arrived within minutes, his moustache twitching with irritation. "A clean job," he admitted, examining the broken skylight above the pedestal. "Rope marks here." Lowered a hook, snatched the vase mid-blackout. "Professional." Holmes knelt, retrieving a sliver of glass. "Too clean, Inspector." "Observe the shards. They're from the skylight, not the vase. No remnants of porcelain here. Curious, don't you think?" Watson frowned. "You're saying the thieves took the vase without breaking it? Then why the shattered glass?" Holmes pocketed the fragment. A pantomime. The crash was a distraction. He strode to the pedestal, running a finger along its edge. "Dust," he murmured. "This vase was moved recently. See the faint ring? It's been shifted inches to the left, days ago." Whitcomb hurried over, wringing his hands. "Mr. Holmes, I assure you, our security." Holmes cut him off. "When was the last time you personally inspected the vase?" The auctioneer paled. 3 days prior. It's been under guard since." "By whom?" "My head of security, Mr. Graves." Holmes' eyes narrowed. "Fetch him." But Graves was gone. His office, Lestrade discovered, lay ransacked. A half-drunk bottle of brandy and a forged letter ordering the guards to stand down during the blackout. Graves was bribed or threatened, Lestrade concluded. Holmes sniffed the bottle. Bitter almonds? Cyanide. A man doesn't poison himself after writing a confession. The woman in black gloves, Lady Agatha Morrow, approached, her voice trembling. "I saw a man lurking near the service stairs. He wore a scar. Here." She gestured to her cheek. Watson recognized the description. Victor Cray, a notorious art thief. "Cray's work," Lestrade growled. "But he's been in Belgium." Holmes drifted to the service door, where the nervous footman now sweated profusely. "You let someone in," Holmes stated. The footman stammered, "A delivery man, crates for the kitchen. He had a paperwork." Holmes leaned closer. "And a scar." The footman nodded. By nightfall, the headlines blared, "Cray steals Ming vase in audacious heist." But in Baker Street, Holmes paced, his mind churning. "Watson, consider the facts. The vase wasn't broken, yet glass fell. The pedestal was disturbed days ago. The head of security vanishes with a clumsy forgery left behind. And Whitcomb..." He paused. "Did you note his cufflinks? Ivory dragons, a match to the vase's design. A sentimental man, perhaps, or a proud one." Watson stirred his tea. "You suspect the auctioneer?" Holmes smirked. "The game is afoot. That vase was never stolen because it was never there to begin with." Chapter 2. The Unseen Thread. The following morning dawned grey and damp, a stubborn fog clinging to the cobblestones of London as Holmes and Watson made their way to Reginald Whitcomb's private residence. The auctioneer lived in a stately townhouse near Mayfair, its iron gates polished to a militaristic gleam. A harried maid ushered them into a parlour cluttered with antiquities, Persian tapestries, Roman busts, and a mahogany desk strewn with invoices. Whitcomb, still in his dressing gown, greeted them with a veneer of composure, though his hands trembled around a teacup. "Mr. Holmes," he began, "I trust you've come to update me on the investigation? The newspapers are crucifying my reputation." Holmes ignored the plea, picking up a jade figurine from the desk. "A curious collection, Mr. Whitcomb. Most of these items passed through your auction house, did they not?" The man stiffened. "I am a connoisseur, not a thief." Watson noted a framed photograph on the mantel, a younger Whitcomb standing beside a severe-faced woman in front of the Carlton auction hall. "Your wife?" he asked. Whitcomb's voice tightened. "Eleanor. She passed last year. The hall was her legacy." Holmes set down the figurine. "And the Ming vase? Did it hold particular significance to her?" The auctioneer's composure cracked. He sank into a chair, his voice hollow. "She acquired it in Shanghai, a triumph that saved us from ruin. Without it, the hall's debts." He trailed off, but Holmes finished the thought. The vase was to be your financial salvation, yet it vanished. Convenient, given its insured value. Whitcomb shot to his feet. "I would never dishonour Eleanor's memory." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Then why did you lie about inspecting the vase 3 days ago?" He produced a ledger from the desk, flipping to a page marked with a red ribbon. "This inventory log shows you accessed the vault 4 days ago, alone. Why the discrepancy?" Before Whitcomb could answer, Lestrade burst in, his coat speckled with rain. "Graves' body was pulled from the Thames," he announced grimly. "Throat cut, no sign of the vase." Watson winced, but Holmes' expression remained unreadable. "Show me the mortuary report," he demanded. The stench of formaldehyde hung thick in the Bow Street morgue as the coroner peeled back the sheet from Graves' corpse. The security chief's face was bloated, a jagged wound marring his neck. "Killed post-mortem," Holmes observed, pointing to the lack of bruising around the cut. "A staged murder. His body was dumped after the heist." Lestrade scowled. "Then who poisoned him?" Holmes lifted Graves' right hand, examining the fingers. "Calluses from a revolver. And ink stains here. A man who handled paperwork frequently." He turned to the coroner. "The contents of his stomach?" The coroner nodded. "Cyanide, as you suspected. Ingested an hour before death." Watson frowned. "But Graves wrote that confession letter after drinking the poison? Impossible." Holmes' eyes gleamed. "Precisely. The letter was planted. Someone needed a scapegoat." He turned to Lestrade. "The auction house's insurance policy, when does it expire?" 3 days, Lestrade replied. "But the payout requires proof of theft or destruction. No body, no vase, no money." Holmes whirled toward the door. "Then we have little time. To the Carlton vault." The vault, a steel-lined chamber beneath the auction house, held the echoes of whispers and the chill of secrets. Holmes knelt beside the empty plinth where the vase had been displayed, his magnifying glass hovering over faint scratches on the floor. "Dragged," he muttered. "Days ago, as I thought." Watson crouched beside him. "But the guards were bribed or blind," Holmes interrupted. He strode to the vault's ledger, flipping through entries. "Here. 4 days ago, Whitcomb signed out the vase for appraisal. It was returned 2 hours later. He snapped the book shut. Only it wasn't." Lestrade blinked. "You're saying he swapped it then?" Holmes nodded. The real vase left the premises days before the heist. The forgery remained, allowing Whitcomb to collect the insurance while his accomplices staged the theft to bury suspicion. Watson crossed his arms. But why involve Cray? A man of his reputation draws unnecessary attention. Holmes paced. Cray wasn't here. The scarred thief was a decoy. Whitcomb needed a phantom culprit to divert the investigation. As if summoned by his name, a constable rushed in, breathless. "Sir, a tip from the docks. A crate matching the vase's dimensions is being loaded onto a steamer bound for Marseille." The docks teemed with shouts and the clatter of cargo chains, the air salted with the tang of fish and coal smoke. Holmes, Watson, and Lestrade wove through the chaos, their eyes locked on a weathered shipping container marked "Fragile Porcelain." Two burly men hoisted it onto a cart, but before they could react, Lestrade barked, "Scotland Yard! Open it!" The crate splintered under a crowbar, revealing straw-packed ceramic shards, the remains of a forgery. "A decoy within a decoy," Holmes murmured, lifting a fragment. "The glaze is wrong. This was never the Ming vase." Watson kicked the crate in frustration. "Then where is the real one?" Holmes turned to the shipping manifest, his finger tracing a name. Duval Sons Antiques, a Parisian front for Cray's operations. He tore off the page. Whitcomb's accomplices are covering their tracks, but haste makes waste. He pointed to a smudged ink stamp on the manifest. "This symbol, a three-headed eagle. It's the mark of a smuggling ring I dismantled years ago. Their leader, Henri Duval, swore revenge." Lestrade paled. "You think this is personal?" Holmes' smile was razor-thin. "All battles are, Inspector. But our path is clear. Whitcomb's lies, Graves' murder, and this crate all thread back to one truth. The vase is still in London." That evening, Baker Street hummed with tension. Maps and documents littered the floor as Holmes pieced together timelines, muttering to himself. Watson studied the manifest's eagle symbol. If Duval's involved, why leave a trail? "Pride," Holmes said without looking up. "He wants me to know he's outplayed me. For now." He pinned a newspaper clipping to the wall, a society column praising Whitcomb's resilience after his wife's death. Eleanor Whitcomb's obituary mentions a brother, Charles Mercer, a banker in Hong Kong. "Wire him, Watson. Inquire about the vase's provenance." As Watson drafted the telegram, Mrs. Hudson entered with a silver tray. "A letter, Mr. Holmes. No postmark." The envelope bore a single letter, D. Inside was a sketch of a dragon coiled around a vase, the Ming artifact, with a scrawled message, "A gift awaits you in the lion's den." Holmes' jaw tightened. The British Museum's lion gates, tonight. Watson reached for his revolver. "A trap?" "Undoubtedly," Holmes said, donning his coat. "But traps reveal the trapper's hand. Come, Watson, the game quickens." Chapter 3. The Lion's Gambit. The British Museum's lion gates loomed through the fog, their stone mains glistening under the dim glow of gas lamps. Holmes and Watson approached cautiously, the echo of their footsteps swallowed by the mist. Watson gripped his revolver, scanning the shadows. "A poor venue for an ambush," he muttered. "Too many exits." Holmes said nothing, his eyes fixed on the skeletal outline of a figure near the gates. As they drew closer, the figure resolved into a stone pedestal bearing a note weighted by a jagged shard of ceramic, the same cobalt blue as the Ming vase. "Follow the path of the dragon," it read. Holmes pocketed the shard, his gaze lifting to the museum's facade. "The Asian Antiquities Wing," he deduced, "where pride and peril intersect." Inside, the halls were cavernous and silent, moonlight filtering through arched windows to illuminate cases of relics. Holmes moved like a spectre, pausing before a display of Ming Dynasty artifacts. Watson lingered at a mural depicting dragons circling a lotus, a mirror of the vase's design. "This symbol," he said, tracing the gold-chased petals. "It's identical to the vase's motif. Was that in the auction catalogue?" Holmes shook his head. A detail omitted from the records. Whitcomb's wife commissioned the piece from a master forger in Shanghai. Its design was meant to honour her family's crest. He produced the telegram from Hong Kong, its message crisp. Charles Mercer confirms vase's unique pattern, never publicly documented. Watson's eyes widened. Then the forgery's flaw isn't the glaze, it's the design. Holmes nodded. Precisely. The replica at the auction bore Mercer's familial emblem, a secret known only to him and Eleanor Whitcomb. Our auctioneer's sentimentality betrayed him. A clatter echoed from the adjacent gallery, a deliberate provocation. Holmes raised a hand, silencing Watson. They edged toward the sound, finding a shattered display case and a scroll unfurled on the floor. Holmes knelt, translating the classical Chinese script. The dragon guards what the lion devours. Watson frowned. More riddles? Homer's smile was taut, a confession. The lion is this museum's pride, the Elgin marbles. But the dragon? He strode to a nearby alcove, where a tapestry hung askew, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a ledger, its pages dense with coded entries. Duval's accounts, Holmes murmured, deciphering the cipher with swift precision. Payments to Whitcomb, dates aligning with the vase's procurement. The auctioneer didn't just swap the vase, he sold Whit to Duval months ago. The heist was a double blind to claim both the insurance and the buyer's payment. A footstep scraped behind them. Watson spun, leveling his revolver at a hooded figure. "Show yourself!" The man stepped into the light, his face scarred, Victor Cray's doppelganger. "Clever, Mr. Holmes," he sneered, but too late. He lunged, a blade flashing. Watson fired, the shot ricocheting off marble as the man darted into the shadows. Holmes gave chase, following the fugitive's trail to the museum's underground vaults. The air grew clammy, the walls lined with crates stamped with the three-headed eagle. "Duval's cash," Holmes breathed. "The real vase is here." But the crates yielded only dust and ledgers, no porcelain. Watson kicked a box in frustration. Another decoy. Holmes studied a shipping label. Not a decoy, a distraction. These crates were staged for us to find. The vase is elsewhere, under the one symbol we'd overlook. A distant clock tolled midnight. Holmes stiffened. The lion devours. The British Lion Bank. Watson, the vaults beneath Whitcomb's auction house are managed by them. The vase was never moved. It's been in their secure storage since the appraisal. As they retreated into the fog, a bullet whizzed past, shattering a window. Down. Watson shoved Holmes behind a pillar as two assailants opened fire. Holmes drew his own pistol, returning fire with lethal precision. One man fell, the other fled, clutching a wounded arm. Breathless, Watson eyed the carnage. Duval's men? Holmes examined the fallen man's coat, retrieving a matchbook stamped "The Silver Serpent Club." A den of thieves in Soho. Our next move is clear. Back at Baker Street, Mrs. Hudson greeted them with a second telegram. Holmes read it aloud. Mercer warns. Eleanor's vase contained a hidden compartment. Its contents far exceed its value. Watson leaned forward. What could be more valuable than a Ming relic? Holmes' eyes darkened. State secrets. Mercer's bank finances colonial interests. If Eleanor smuggled documents implicating the Crown. He tossed the matchbook onto the desk. Whitcomb isn't merely a fraud. He is a pawn in a larger game, and we've just provoked the players. A knock rattled the door. Lestrade entered, his face ashen. Whitcomb's been attacked. Found unconscious in his office with this. He handed Holmes a blood-stained note. Silence the hound, or the empire falls. Chapter 4. The Hound's Hour. Reginald Whitcomb's office reeked of blood and lavender oil, the latter a futile attempt to mask the metallic tang of violence. The auctioneer lay sprawled across his mahogany desk, a gash marring his temple, his fingers curled around an empty ledger. Sherlock Holmes knelt beside him, pressing a handkerchief to the wound. "Alive," he declared, "but his silence is the true target." Watson swiftly administered a tonic from his medical bag, while Inspector Lestrade hovered in the doorway, his usual bluster replaced by unease. The blood-stained note, "Silence the hound, or the empire falls," lay on the floor, its jagged script a silent threat. Holmes held it to the light, revealing a faint watermark, a three-headed eagle superimposed over a lion. Duval's symbol. But this paper. He crumbled the edge between his fingers. Wove Sons linen stock, exclusive to government officers. Watson's brow furrowed. Parliament? Or the Foreign Office, Holmes muttered. He turned to Whitcomb's desk, sifting through invoices and personal correspondence. A faded photograph slipped free. Eleanor Whitcomb standing beside a stern-faced man in a colonial officer's uniform. Charles Mercer, Holmes noted, Eleanor's brother, stationed in Hong Kong during the Vases acquisition. He pocketed the image. Our auctioneer's troubles run deeper than debt. Whitcomb stirred, his voice a rasp. They knew about the compartment. Holmes leaned closer. In the vase? The man nodded weakly. Eleanor's letters. Proof of embezzlement. The Crown's opium funds. Watson stiffened. Good God. She blackmailed the government? No, Whitcomb croaked. She exposed them. The vase was her cipher. Mercer smuggled documents inside its base. But after her death, Duval's men found out. They threatened to ruin me unless I. His words dissolved into a cough. Holmes finished coldly. Unless you sold them the vase and staged the heist to erase their trail. But they double-crossed you. Lestrade stepped forward. Where's the vase now? Whitcomb's eyes fluttered shut. Bank vault, British Lion. But the documents, gone before I could retrieve them. The British Lion Bank's vaults were a fortress of steel and shadow, guarded by men with rifles and steely gazes. Holmes, Watson, and Lestrade descended via a service elevator, their lanterns cutting through the gloom. The manager insists nothing's been accessed, Lestrade grumbled. But Whitcomb's private deposit box requires his key and a fingerprint seal. Holmes halted before box 317, its brass plate tarnished. A fingerprint seal introduced last year, he mused. Yet Whitcomb's injury, he gestured to the auctioneer's bandaged hand, renders his prints unreadable, a flaw in their design. Watson blinked. Then how? The system defaults to a secondary code if biometrics fail, Holmes said, examining the keyhole. A code known only to Whitcomb and the vault's architect, a man found dead in the Thames 6 months ago. Convenient. He inserted a lockpick, his hands deft. The door clicked open. Inside lay the Ming vase, its dragons glinting maliciously in the lantern light. Holmes lifted it, probing the base. A hidden compartment slid open, empty. The documents are gone, Watson groaned, but Holmes smiled. Not gone. Replaced. He withdrew a single sheet of rice paper, its surface covered in Eleanor's meticulous script, coordinates, dates, and the initials. H.D. Henri Duval, Lestrade growled. But what's this? He pointed to a sketch of a serpent coiled around a warship. Holmes' eyes narrowed. The HMS Vanguard. A naval vessel docked at Portsmouth. Its captain, Arthur Walsh, was Mercer's associate in Hong Kong. A shout echoed from the corridor. Guards scrambled as a figure darted past, the scarred decoy from the museum. Holmes gave chase, cornering the man in a dead-end passage. You work for Duval, he stated. The man spat. Duval's a middleman. The real power's in Westminster. They'll bury you for this. Before Holmes could react, the man bit down, his body convulsing. Cyanide. Watson knelt too late. Another loose end, he muttered. Holmes pried a silver pendant from the corpse's neck, a serpent devouring its tail. The Silver Serpent Club. Let's pay them a visit. Soho's underbelly pulsed with vice, the air thick with opium smoke, and the discordant twang of a piano. The Silver Serpent Club's bouncer, a hulk with brass knuckles, barred their entry until Holmes flashed the pendant. Where expected, he lied smoothly. Inside, patrons draped in silk and shadows eyed them with suspicion. A woman materialized from the haze, Madame Lau, the club's proprietor, her smile sharp as a scalpel. Mr. Holmes, she purred, we have wagered on your arrival. She slid a dossier across the bar, a gift from an admirer. The file detailed shipments, opium crates marked T, en route to Marseille, bearing the three-headed eagle. Duval's fleet, Holmes deduced. Madame Lau nodded. But the serpent eats its own. Duval's men grow restless. They whisper of a British benefactor, a man with a lion's greed. Watson tensed. Someone in Parliament? She laughed. Higher. A man who wears the Crown's armour to hide his rot. Holmes closed the dossier. Where is the HMS Vanguard docked? Portsmouth, she said. But you will find no answers there. The ship's cargo vanished yesterday, along with Captain Walsh. Dawn found Holmes and Watson aboard a rattling train to Portsmouth. The dossier's contents spread between them. Walsh was Mercer's liaison, Holmes said. He facilitated Eleanor's document smuggling under the guise of naval logistics. But if Duval's silenced him, Watson stared at the coordinates in Eleanor's notes. These lead to a warehouse near the docks. If the documents aren't on the ship, they're there. The Portsmouth docks sprawled under a leaden sky, the HMS Vanguard looming like a spectre. Its deck was deserted, cabins ransacked. In the captain's quarters, Holmes unearthed a logbook. Cargo transferred to Warehouse 5 per Lord C directive. Warehouse 5 was a decaying husk, its doors ajar. Inside, crates stamped with the eagle emblem lay splintered. Empty. Another dead end, Watson sighed. But Holmes crouched, retrieving a torn envelope. The crest on its seal froze his blood, a lion and dragon entwined. The Prime Minister's personal insignia, he whispered, a gun cocked behind them. Drop the envelope, Mr. Holmes. They turned. Standing in the doorway, revolver steady, was Inspector Lestrade. Chapter 5. The Serpent's Crown. For a heartbeat, the warehouse seemed to freeze. The creak of rotting timbers, the distant cry of gulls, the cold steel of Lestrade's revolver bridging the silence between them. Watson stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. Lestrade, what in God's name are you doing? The inspector's face was a mask of grim resolve, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of anguish. You shouldn't have followed the trail, Holmes. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. Holmes didn't flinch. Buried or burned. The opium funds, the embezzlement, Eleanor Whitcomb's documents would topple more than a few gilded thrones. Yours included, Inspector? Lestrade's grip tightened. I am not the villain here, but I have a family. Threats came from higher places. Men who don't make empty promises. He gestured to the envelope in Holmes' hand. That crest? It's a death warrant. Hand it over. Watson inched closer, calculating the distance to Lestrade's weapon. Holmes, however, smiled, a razor's edge of a smile. You are a poor liar, Lestrade. If you intended to kill us, you'd have fired already, which means you need something, alive. A shadow shifted behind Lestrade. The scarred decoy from the museum lunged, knife glinting, but Watson tackled him, the two men crashing into a stack of crates. Holmes seized the distraction, disarming Lestrade with a swift twist of his wrist. The inspector hissed, You don't understand. They will kill my children? Holmes finished coldly. Your daughter's boarding school in Surrey received a generous donation last month from an anonymous benefactor. A bribe or insurance? He tossed Lestrade's revolver to Watson. You have been played, Inspector. The Prime Minister's crest is a forgery. Lestrade froze. What? Holmes held the envelope to the light, tracing the lion and dragon emblem. The watermark is blurred. A cheap transfer, not pressed linen. The real traitor isn't in Westminster. They want us to believe it is. He turned to the decoy, now pinned under Watson's knee. Who paid you? Duval, or the Silver Serpent's true master. The man spat blood, grinning. The serpent eats its own. Then his body jerked. A sniper's bullet tore through his skull. Down! Holmes roared, shoving Lestrade behind a crate as gunfire rained from the warehouse rafters. Watson returned fire, driving their unseen assailant into retreat. Go! Holmes barked. The HMS Vanguard logbook mentioned a transfer to Dover. The documents are there. They fled through a maze of dockside alleys, Lestrade's breaths ragged with guilt and fear. I didn't know, he panted. They said the documents would expose undercover agents, put lives at risk. A convenient lie, Holmes said, ducking into a telegraph office. He scrawled a message to Mycroft. Intercept Dover cargo. Urgent. The opium funds were funneled through naval channels. Eleanor's proof implicates not politicians, but admirals. Men like Captain Walsh, who vanished after arranging shipments. Watson frowned. But why frame the Prime Minister? To muddy the waters. The serpent's head is closer than we think. Holmes paid the clerk and turned to Lestrade. Redeem yourself. Arrest Madame Lau at the Silver Serpent Club. She is the linchpin. The inspector hesitated. And my daughter? Mycroft will see her safe, Holmes said. Now, go. Dover's cliffs loomed under a brooding sky, the channel churning like molten iron. Holmes and Watson boarded a freighter docked at Pier 12, its hold reeking of salt and secrecy. The captain, a grizzled man with a Dutch accent, barred their path. No passengers. Holmes pressed a gold sovereign into his palm. We're here for the tea. The man paled. Cargo hold. Third crate. Inside the crate, nestled between opium bricks, lay a steel lockbox. Holmes cracked it open, revealing Eleanor's documents. Ledgers, letters, and a photograph of Admiral James Whitcomb, Reginald's estranged uncle, shaking hands with Henri Duval. The serpent's crown, Holmes murmured. Admiral Whitcomb used his nephew's auction house to launder opium profits. Eleanor discovered it, hid the proof, and paid the price. Watson scowled. But why steal the vase now? Because Reginald finally grew a conscience, a voice drawled behind them. They turned. Admiral Whitcomb filled the doorway, flanked by armed sailors. My fool nephew tried to retrieve these documents to clear his wife's name. Sentimental idiot. He levelled a pistol. Hand them over. Holmes stepped forward, shielding the lockbox. You killed Eleanor. She meddled, the Admiral roared. Now, the box, or I will sink this ship with you in it. A whistle pierced the air. Mycroft's agents swarmed the deck, disarming the sailors. The Admiral turned to flee, but Lestrade emerged from the shadows, fists clenched. For your niece, he growled, tackling the man into the hold. Dawn broke over London as Holmes presented the documents to Mycroft in the Diogenes Club. The Admiralty will bury this, Mycroft warned. Scandal serves no one. But justice does, Holmes replied. Ensure Reginald Whitcomb walks free. He was a pawn, not a player. Mycroft nodded. And the vase? Returned to the British Museum, Holmes said, where Eleanor's legacy belongs. As they left, Watson eyed him. You're letting the Admiralty off lightly. Holmes lit a cigarette, the smoke curling like a serpent. The game isn't over, Watson. Admiral Whitcomb was a middleman. The true serpent? It still wears a crown. Chapter 6. The Crown's Shadow. The Thames fog clung to London like a shroud as Holmes and Watson trudged back to Baker Street, the weight of Mycroft's warnings lingering in the air. Mrs. Hudson met them at the door, her face ashen. A telegram from Lestrade, she said, thrusting the paper into Holmes' hand. Lady Agatha Morrow found dead, serpent pendant at scene, urgent. Watson stiffened. The woman who identified Cray's decoy. Holmes crumpled the telegram. A loose end silenced. To Chelsea, Watson. Lady Agatha's Mayfair mansion stood in macabre splendour, its opulent halls now a tableau of dread. Lestrade awaited them in the conservatory, where the aristocrat's body lay slumped over a tea-stained escritoire, a silver serpent pendant driven into the wood beside her. No signs of struggle, Lestrade muttered. Poison, likely. Same cyanide trace as Graves. Holmes circled the room, his gaze snagging on a misplaced book. The Opium Wars, a history. Protruding from a shelf. Behind it lay a hidden compartment, its contents plundered save for a single torn page. Watson deciphered the fragment. Dunsmore's shipment delayed at Dover. Eliminate the witness. Lord Henry Dunsmore, Holmes murmured. A peer in the House of Lords. patron of the arts and the Silver Serpent Club. He lifted the serpent pendant, its eyes inset with rubies, a key to their inner sanctum. Disguised as dock workers, Holmes and Watson infiltrated the Silver Serpent Club at midnight. The air reeked of absinthe and betrayal. Madame Lau presided over a backroom card game, her clientele a grotesque tapestry of nobility and thuggery. Lord Dunsmore sat among them, his signet ring, a three-headed eagle, glinting as he shuffled cards. Holmes lingered in the shadows, passing whispers. The HMS Illustrious docks at dawn, a smuggler hissed. Crates marked textiles for the East India warehouses. Dunsmore nodded. See it done. The Crown's eyes are elsewhere. Watson stiffened. They're using royal ships. Holmes silenced him with a glance, tracking a courier who slipped into the alley with a leather satchel. The chase that followed was a symphony of chaos. Mud-spattered cobblestones, the courier's panicked breaths, a knife hurled at Watson that embedded itself in a rain barrel. They cornered the man beneath Blackfriars Bridge, but as Holmes seized the satchel, the courier gasped. The serpent never sleeps, and bit a cyanide capsule. The satchel held a ledger, its pages scrawled with coordinates and payments to H.D. Watson scowled. Henri Duval again? Holmes traced the entries. No. Henry Dunsmore. The Admiral was a puppet. The Lord pulls the strings. Dunsmore's Grosvenor Square estate loomed behind iron gates, its windows ablaze with light. Holmes and Watson scaled the garden wall, slipping into a study lined with colonial relics. A map of the Far East dominated the wall, pins marking opium routes converging on Dover. You're trespassing, Mr. Holmes. Dunsmore stood in the doorway, a revolver steady in his hand. Watson reached for his own weapon, but Holmes raised a placating palm. A curious hobby, my lord. Mapping empire and addiction. The Lord's smile was glacial. Empire is addiction, wealth, power, conquest, all opium for the masses. Eleanor Whitcomb understood that. Pity she lacked the stomach for it. Holmes stepped closer. You had her killed. Not the Admiral, you. She discovered your trade through her brother's bank. Dunsmore's composure cracked. She threatened to expose the Lord's investments in the East India Company. Meant to cleanse the Crown's honour. Hypocrisy. That vases documents funded palaces, railways, progress. A floorboard creaked. Mycroft emerged from the shadows, flanked by armed agents. Your progress ends tonight, Lord Dunsmore. The Lord laughed, bitter and hollow. You think me alone? The serpent has many heads. He lunged for the fireplace, yanking a lever. A hidden panel slid open, and he vanished into the dark. Mycroft sighed. The tunnels. He will reach the docks. Dawn bled over the Thames as Holmes stood aboard the HMS Illustrious, its hold brimming with opium crates stamped with the East India Company's crest. Dunsmore's escape gnawed at him, but Watson gripped his shoulder. The ledger names his allies. This isn't over. Holmes nodded, staring at the three-headed eagle emblazoned on a crate. No, but the serpent's fangs are blunted. For now. Mycroft joined them, his voice a low rumble. The company will disavow Dunsmore. Burn the records. Whitehall prefers its shadows. And the Crown? Watson asked. Mycroft's gaze drifted to Buckingham Palace, its spires gilded by the rising sun. The Crown endures, Doctor, but its shadows grow long. As they disembarked, Holmes slipped a ruby-eyed serpent pendant into his pocket, a promise of battles yet to come. Chapter 7. The Serpent's Den. The tunnels beneath Lord Dunsmore's estate were a labyrinth of damp stone and whispered secrets, the air thick with the stench of mildew and betrayal. Sherlock Holmes led the charge, his lantern carving a frail path through the darkness, while Watson and Mycroft's agents followed close behind. The scrape of boots echoed like a funeral march. He will head for the river, Holmes muttered. A boat waits. Hurry. They emerged onto a derelict dock shrouded in pre-dawn gloom, the Thames slithering past like a black serpent. A motor launch idled in the shadows, its deck empty. Holmes boarded, his fingers brushing a still warm teacup in the cockpit. "Gone," he said, but not far. Watson spotted a trail of droplets leading to a cargo barge moored downstream, its hull rusted and nameless. The barge's hold was a cathedral of contraband, crates of opium, ivory, and firearms stamped with the three-headed eagle. At its centre stood Lord Dunsmore, his composure fraying as he hurled documents into a blazing oil drum. "Too late, Holmes," he sneered. "The Crown's sins turned to ash." Holmes lunged, tackling him to the floor as Watson stamped out the flames. Mycroft's agents swarmed the hold, seizing crates, but the Lord laughed wildly. "Fools! These are but scales of the serpent. The head remains." A gunshot rang out. One of Mycroft's men collapsed, blood blooming across his chest. From the shadows stepped Madame Lau, her silk gown replaced by a sniper's leathers, a smoking rifle in hand. The Silver Serpent. "Thanks you for your service, Mr. Holmes," she purred. "You've led us to the evidence and the traitor." She aimed at Dunsmore. Holmes threw himself sideways, knocking the rifle's barrel upward as the shot tore into the ceiling. Chaos erupted. Agents returned fire, Dunsmore scrambled for the gangplank, and Madame Lau vanished into the smoke. Watson gave chase, cornering her in the engine room. She grinned, pressing a detonator to her chest. "The barge is rigged to burn. Tell Mycroft his empire ends tonight." The explosion threw Watson into the Thames. He surfaced, choking on oil and brine, to see the barge engulfed in flames. Holmes dragged him onto the dock, his coat singed. "Dunsmore?" Watson coughed. "Escaped," Holmes said grimly, "but not without a parting gift." He opened his palm, revealing a charred fragment of stationery, a partial address in Mayfair and a smudged name. V. Cray. Hours later, in a dimly lit alcove of the Diogenes Club, Mycroft studied the fragment. Victor Cray. A ghost. Holmes sipped brandy, the firelight sharpening his features. A ghost with a vendetta. Dunsmore's ledger mentioned payments to a VK in Marseille. Cray isn't dead. He's been orchestrating this from the shadows, using Duval and Dunsmore as pawns. Watson leaned forward. "But why?" "Revenge," Mycroft intoned. 5 years ago, Holmes dismantled Cray's syndicate in Paris. His brother died in custody. This is his resurrection. A plot to bankrupt the Crown's credibility and rebuild his empire from the ashes. Holmes stood, pacing. The Ming vase was never about money. It was bait. Cray knew Eleanor's documents would lure us into the serpent's nest, forcing Mycroft to expose the Crown's corruption to stop him. Either way, the empire loses. Watson frowned. "Then where is the real Voss?" "Where we least expect," Holmes said. "With Cray. A trophy and a threat." A knock interrupted them. Lestrade entered, his face ashen. "Reginald Whitcomb's dead, found in his cell with a serpent pendant in his fist. And there is a message for you, Holmes." The note bore a single phrase, scrawled in blood. "Come to where it began." The Carlton auction hall loomed like a tomb, its grandeur faded to dust. Holmes and Watson entered, revolvers drawn, their footsteps echoing through the hollow chamber. The Ming vase sat atop its original pedestal, bathed in moonlight. Pristine, undeniable. "A replica," Watson whispered. "No," Holmes said. "The real one, Cray's final mockery." He lifted the vase, revealing a ticking clockwork device beneath it. A bomb. A laugh echoed from the balcony. Victor Cray stood, his scarred face twisted in triumph. "You lose, Holmes. The vase or the city. Choose." Holmes hesitated, then hurled the vase at Cray's feet. It shattered, the explosion consuming the balcony in a fireball. Watson shielded his eyes, coughing. "Holmes." But when the smoke cleared, Cray was gone. Only a serpent pendant remained, melted into the floor. "He will return," Holmes said, staring at the wreckage. "And we will be waiting," Watson replied. Hours later, in a dimly lit alcove of the Diogenes Club, Mycroft studied the fragment. Victor Cray, a ghost. Holmes sipped brandy, the firelight sharpening his features. A ghost with a vendetta. Dunsmore's ledger mentioned payments to a Vic in Marseille. Cray ain't dead. He has been orchestrating this from the shadows, using Duval and Dunsmore as pawns. Watson leaned forward. But why? Revenge, Mycroft intoned. 5 years ago, Holmes dismantled Cray's syndicate in Paris. His brother died in custody. This is his resurrection, a plot to bankrupt the Crown's credibility and rebuild his empire from the ashes. Holmes stood, pacing. The Ming vase was never about money. It was bait. Cray knew Eleanor's documents would lure us into the serpent's nest, forcing Mycroft to expose the Crown's corruption to stop him. Either way, the Empire loses. Watson frowned. Then where's the real vase? Where we least expect, Holmes said. With Cray, a trophy and a threat. A knock interrupted them. Lestrade entered, his face ashen. Reginald Whitcomb's dead. Found in his cell with a serpent pendant in his fist. And, "There's a message for you, Holmes." The note bore a single phrase, scrawled in blood. "Come to where it began." The Carlton auction hall loomed like a tomb, its grandeur faded to dust. Holmes and Watson entered, revolvers drawn, their footsteps echoing through the hollow chamber. The Ming vase sat atop its original pedestal, bathed in moonlight, pristine, undeniable. "A replica," Watson whispered. "No," Holmes said, "the real one, Cray's final mockery." He lifted the vase, revealing a ticking clockwork device beneath it. A bomb. A laugh echoed from the balcony. Victor Cray stood, his scarred face twisted in triumph. "You lose, Holmes. The vase or the city. Choose." Holmes hesitated, then hurled the vase at Cray's feet. It shattered, the explosion consuming the balcony in a fireball. Watson shielded his eyes, coughing. "Holmes?" But when the smoke cleared, Cray was gone. Only a serpent pendant remained, melted into the floor. "He will return," Holmes said, staring at the wreckage. "And we'll be waiting," Watson replied. Chapter 8. The Phantom's Gambit. The ruins of the Carlton auction hall smouldered under a leaden sky, the scent of burnt velvet and molten gold clinging to the air. Sherlock Holmes sifted through the debris, his fingers brushing the warped serpent pendant fused to the floor. Watson stood at his side, scanning the skeletal remains of the balcony. "Cray's body wasn't found," he muttered. "He could still be out there." "He is," Holmes said coldly, "and hell strike again. Pride demands it." He pocketed the pendant, its once sharp edges now blunted by fire. This was never about the vase. It was a gambit to lure us into the open, to prove he's outmaneuvered the Crown itself. As they departed, a street urchin darted forward, thrusting a sealed envelope into Homer's hand. Inside was a train ticket to Paris and a clipping from Le Figaro, an advertisement for an antiquities auction at the Louvre, featuring a Ming Dynasty vase described as recently rediscovered. Watson read over his shoulder. "A forgery?" "Or the real vase," Holmes said. Cray's final taunt. "Come, Watson, the game returns to its origin." The Gare du Nord swarmed with travellers, their voices a cacophony of French and suspicion. Holmes and Watson boarded the overnight train, their compartment shadowed by the weight of the unspoken. "Why Paris?" Watson pressed. "Cray's empire here was destroyed." "Resurrected," Holmes corrected. "The serpent sheds its skin. The Louvre auction is a stage, one he will use to humiliate us publicly." He unfolded a dossier procured by Mycroft. Guest lists, catalogue entries, and a photograph of the vase. Watson squinted. "The dragons. Their claws are curved differently. Is this the replica?" Holmes' eyes narrowed. "No. This is Eleanor Whitcomb's original. The auction house forgery was a flawed copy. This bears her family's crest. Cray didn't steal it. He reclaimed what it. The heist, the bomb, all theatre, to make us doubt the truth. The Louvre's gallery glittered with chandeliers and treachery, aristocrats and criminals mingling under the guise of civility. Holmes, disguised as a Belgian collector, drifted through the crowd, while Watson played the role of a retired colonel. The Ming vase sat enshrined on a dais, its dragons shimmering under glass. A murmur rippled through the room as Victor Cray emerged, his scar concealed beneath a silk half-mask, his voice a honeyed rasp. Messieurs et mesdames, tonight we honour history's shadow, the art empires tried to bury. He lifted the vase, his gaze locking with Holmes. This piece, plucked from oblivion, is a testament to perseverance. Watson edged closer, but Holmes held him back. Wait, he wants a spectacle. Cray continued. The vase's previous owner, the late Eleanor Whitcomb, hid more than beauty within it. He pressed a hidden latch. The base slid open, revealing a compartment. Secrets, the kind that topple thrones. He withdrew a parchment, a letter signed by Queen Victoria herself, sanctioning opium trade expansions. The crowd gasped. Holmes stiffened. A forgery, but convincing enough to spark an international incident. Cray smirked. Bid generously, my friends. History favours the bold. As the auction commenced, Holmes infiltrated the back corridors, Watson at his heels. They navigated labyrinthine passages to a vault marked Archives Interdicts. Inside, crates bore the three-headed eagle. The serpent's hoard, Watson breathed. Holmes pried open a crate, revealing stacks of identical letters, forged royal decrees ready to flood Europe's black markets. Cray's true weapon isn't the vase, it's distrust. One letter discredits the crown. 1,000 could incite war. Footsteps echoed. Cray appeared in the doorway, a revolver in hand. I wondered when you would spoil the fun. Watson lunged, knocking the gun aside as Holmes tackled Cray. The men grappled, crashing into crates, sending forged papers cascading like poisoned snow. Cray hissed, "You'll never stop it, Holmes. The letters are already en route." Holmes pinned him, pressing a shard of the serpent pendant to his throat. "Where?" Cray spat, scattered to the wind. "By dawn, every parliament and palace will know Britain's sins." Watson retrieved the gun. "The vaults, we can intercept them." "Too late," Cray laughed. "But you are welcome to try." A gendarme's whistle pierced the air. The fight had drawn attention. Cray seized the distraction, kneeing Holmes in the ribs and vanishing into the shadows. Dawn found them at a Parisian courier hub, intercepting shipments, but the trail dissolved like mist. "He has won," Watson growled. "No." Holmes stared at the Seine, its currents ink-black under the rising sun. "The letters are a feint. Cray's true target isn't governments. It's Mycroft. Discredit him, and the Empire's intelligence crumbles." He turned, eyes alight. The Louvre auction was broadcast by telephone to London's press. By now, the Queen's letter dominates headlines. Mycroft will be forced to resign unless we prove it's fake. Watson paled. How? Holmes unfolded Cray's train ticket, revealing a scribbled address on the back. The forger. Every artist leaves a signature. The Montmartre studio reeked of turpentine and fear. The forger, a gaunt man named Claude Renard, cowered in a corner. "He made me do it, threatened my family." Holmes thrust the Queen's letter at him. "Prove it's counterfeit." Renard pointed to the royal seal. "The lion's mane, 7 strokes. The real seal has 8. At the British Embassy, Holmes confronted the press, magnifying glass in hand. "Observe the seal's detail. A deliberate error. This document is a fabrication." Murmurs of doubt rippled through the crowd, but the damage lingered like a stain. As they departed, a messenger boy handed Holmes a telegram. "Lion's Den compromised. Return at once. Mycroft." The serpent had struck its fangs home. Chapter 9. The Lion's Fall. The Diogenes Club stood shrouded in uncharacteristic chaos. Mycroft's private sanctum, usually a temple of silence and cigar smoke, buzzed with grim-faced officials and the metallic clatter of seized documents. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson pushed through the crowd to find Mycroft seated at his desk, his bulk diminished by an invisible weight. A parliamentary summons lay before him. its seal broken. "Suspension of duties," Mycroft said flatly, "pending investigation into treasonous negligence." Watson blanched, but Holmes snatched the summons, scrutinizing its language. "Cray's work. The forged letters have eroded Whitehall's trust in your judgment." Mycroft steepled his fingers. "The serpent's venom spreads. My agents report coordinated leaks to the press. Whispers of my collusion with foreign syndicates. Even the Prime Minister doubts me now." Holmes paced, his mind a storm. "Cray requires two things to triumph: your ruin and a spectacle to immortalize it. Where better than the Queen's Diamond Jubilee? 3 days hence, the eyes of the Empire will be on London. He will strike then." Watson stiffened. "The procession passes Westminster, Buckingham Palace, the Tower Annie of which could be a target." "All of which," Holmes corrected. He tossed a broadsheet onto the desk. The headline screamed, "Royal Jubilee to showcase Crown's history. Rare artifacts on display." Below it, a list of exhibits included the Ming Dynasty Lotus Vase, on loan from a private collector. Mycroft's jaw tightened. The real vase. Cray means to display it publicly as proof of the Crown's corruption. "Worse," Holmes said. "He will pair it with Eleanor Whitcomb's documents. Imagine the tableau. The Queen's procession halted by evidence of her predecessor's sins. The Empire's foundation crumbles in real time." Dusk found Holmes and Watson in the crypts beneath the Tower of London, lanterns casting grotesque shadows on the stone walls. The Jubilee artefacts were stored here under armed guard, or so Scotland Yard believed. Yet the vault door hung ajar, its lock picked with surgical precision. Inside, the Ming vase gleamed on a crate, flanked by Eleanor's letters and a clockwork device wired to a stack of dynamite. Holmes knelt, tracing the fuse. "Rigged to detonate when the vault opens. A trap for the Queen's curators." Watson eyed the timer. 10 hours. Can we disarm it? No need. Holmes pried open the vase's hidden compartment, extracting a slip of rice paper. Coordinates. Cray's arrogance compels him to gloat. Hell be here, watching. The tower's battlements offered a panoramic view of the Thames, its waters oily under the moon. Holmes spotted the figure at once, a silhouette leaning against the parapet, a serpent pendant glinting at his throat. Victor Cray turned, his scarred face a mosaic of triumph and malice. "You are late, Mr. Holmes." Holmes advanced, Watson at his flank. "Your vendetta ends tonight, Cray. The bomb's disarmed. Your letters exposed as forgeries." Cray laughed. "You mistake petals for the root. The bomb was never meant to kill. Its purpose was to draw you here." He gestured to the river below, where a barge draped in black crepe floated toward the tower. "That vessel carries enough dynamite to level this fortress. When the Jubilee crowds gather, the Crown's history, and its future, will be erased." Watson drew his revolver. "You will die with it." "All men die," Cray said, "but legends endure." He lunged, a knife flashing. Holmes parried with his cane, the clang of steel echoing. Watson fired, but Cray twisted, the bullet grazing his shoulder. The assassin staggered, then leapt onto a rope ladder dangling from a waiting airship, a sleek, silent craft painted with a 3-headed eagle. Holmes sprinted, seizing the ladder as the airship ascended. Watson shouted after him, but the roar of engines drowned his voice. The airship soared over London, the city's gaslights flickering like earthbound stars. Cray crouched in the gondola, hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder. "You're too late, Holmes. The barge's timer is set. Nothing can stop it." Holmes climbed aboard, his voice ice. "Except you." He hurled himself at Cray, the men crashing into control panels. The airship lurched, spinning toward the Thames. Below, the barge drifted perilously close to the tower's foundations. Cray gripped a detonator. "Shall we die together?" Holmes wrenched it from his grasp, tossing it into the river. "I don't share the stage with serpents." He slammed Cray's head into the gondola wall, the man collapsing, unconscious. Steering the airship away from the barge, Holmes triggered a distress flare. On the docks, Watson and Lestrade's men stormed the vessel, disarming the dynamite with minutes to spare. At dawn, Mycroft met them at Baker Street, his authority tentatively restored. Cray's in custody. The Jubilee proceeds. Holmes stared into the fire, the serpent pendant melting in the flames. But the serpent's head remains. Who funded the airship? Armed the barge? Cray is a blade, not the hand. Mycroft's silence was answer enough. Watson handed Holmes a brandy. Rest, Holmes. Even legends need sleep. Holmes drank, his gaze distant. The final move approaches, Watson, and we must be ready. Chapter 10. The Serpent's End. The Dawn of the Queens. Diamond Jubilee broke over London in a wash of crimson and gold, the city's spires gleaming like daggers against the sky. Sherlock Holmes stood at the window of 221B Baker Street, his silhouette sharp against the pale light. The charred serpent pendant from Cray's airship, clenched in his hand. "The final thread, Watson," he murmured. "The one we have yet to pull." Watson, nursing a brandy, eyed the pendant. "You've said Cray was a blade, not the hand. But whose hand?" Holmes turned, his eyes alight. The same that signed Eleanor Whitcomb's death warrant. The same that ensured Dunsmore's opium shipments sailed unchallenged. The serpent's head wears a crown, Watson, one we dined with mere weeks ago. A knock interrupted them. Mycroft entered, his bulk filling the doorway, his face unreadable. "The Jubilee begins in 3 hours. The Crown expects your discretion, Sherlock." "Discretion?" Holmes hissed. "Or complicity?" He flung the serpent pendant onto the desk. This was found in the vaults beneath Parliament. Forged royal seals, Admiralty orders, all traced to a single office. "Yours, Mycroft?" Watson recoiled. "Mycroft? But why?" Mycroft's voice was a glacier. "To preserve the Empire. Eleanor's documents proved the Crown profited from opium wars. Exposure would have shattered us. Cray's forgeries, Dunsmore's greed, all distractions to bury the truth." Holmes stepped closer. "And the vase? The heist?" "A necessary farce," Mycroft said. "Eleanor hid the original documents inside it. I had Whitcomb stage the theft to retrieve them. But Cray intercepted the plan, seeking to twist it into his revenge." Watson surged to his feet. "You sacrificed Reginald Whitcomb? Let Graves die? Let Lestrade's daughter hang in the balance?" "The Empire requires difficult choices, Doctor," Mycroft said coldly. Holmes snatched a telegram from the desk. From Hong Kong. Charles Mercer confirmed the vase's hidden compartment held not just secrets, but Eleanor's final letter, exonerating the Crown. She intended to expose only the rogue admirals, not the monarchy. You burned her letter to maintain your lie. Mycroft's mask slipped, a flicker of shame. The Empire is a fragile thing, brother, built on shadows. And today it burns in the light, Holmes said. He tossed the telegram into the fire. The Queen receives Eleanor's letter at noon. The truth, unvarnished. The Jubilee procession snaked through London, a river of gold and crimson. Holmes and Watson watched from a balcony overlooking Westminster, the Ming vase displayed prominently beside the Queen's carriage, a peace offering from the Crown to Shanghai's artisans. Mycroft, stripped of title and influence, stood apart, his gaze hollow. As the crowd cheered, Watson nodded to the vase. Eleanor's legacy prevails. Holmes lit a cigarette, the smoke curling like a vanquished serpent. Legacies are but pauses between battles, Watson. The game never ends. A messenger boy approached, handing Holmes a note. He read it, smirked, and tossed it into the Thames. "Cray?" Watson asked. "Escaped custody. A parting gift? The serpent sheds its skin." Watson groaned. "Then it's not over." Holmes adjusted his deerstalker, eyes gleaming. "My dear Watson, it's just beginning." The following morning, the Times headline declared, "Crown acknowledges past wrongs. Vase returned to China in historic gesture." In a shadowed Parisian cafe, Victor Cray read the paper, his scar twitching into a smile. A man in a three-headed eagle pin slid into the seat opposite him. The Empire's wounds are fresh, Monsieur Cray. Shall we salt them? Cray lit a match, watching it burn. Tell your masters, the serpent bids its time. Elsewhere, in a Sussex cottage, Eleanor Whitcomb's letters were buried in a rose garden, her name finally at peace. And in Baker Street, a telegram arrived. Need your eyes on a curious matter in Vienna. Lestrade. Holmes tossed it to Watson. Pack your revolver, Doctor. The curtain rises.